The Ghost Hunt of Mitchell Laithes. A group of friends and I had always been interested in the paranormal and had attended several ghost hunts. These have been arranged by some of the country's leading paranormal groups who charge quite a lot of money for the pleasure of accompanying them. On their investigations, they always stated that their investigation was going to be held in one of the country's most haunted locations. And invariably the night panned out in just the same way. Whoever the group was, and due to taking money-paying guests, they felt duty-bound to put on a show. And put on a show they did. One I remember was held at Annesley Hall in Nottinghamshire, which was the home of Mary Chaworth, whose lover was none other than Lord Byron. He often frequented the hall. They gave us lots of history surrounding the building with the aid of their historian, and walked us around the building and its outhouses. Then it became quite boring and people were wanting some concrete evidence of the spirit world. And so if by magic it happened. At this point one of the investigation team became possessed by only what I can describe as a very bad actor. And there was another team member who was never more than a stone's throw away from any noise that was heard, and indeed any stone that was thrown. The more investigations we attended, we witnessed the same nonsense going on within the teams, which in turn left us all feeling very disillusioned. And we sensed that these teams were raking in large amounts of money by conning the fare-paying public. So we decided to conduct our own paranormal investigation in an abandoned mental hospital, which at one point in its history was also a hospital for infectious diseases. This was beneath the village of Earl's Heaton in a suburb of Dewsbury in West Yorkshire. The name of the hospital was Mitchell Laithes. We booked a taxi to take us and our equipment to the destination. As we entered Earl's Heaton, the taxi driver pulled into the car park of the Spangled Bull public house. We asked him why it stopped there and he told us he could not, dare not take us to that place, and warned us of the dangers of going there and told us of the many ghosts that were supposed to roam around the buildings and the grounds. He gave us directions and told us it would take 15 minutes to get to the entrance gate. We thanked him and laughed to ourselves. We made our way down the road, chatting with each other about the taxi driver and his fears. We walked through an area called Woodburn, and then arrived at the entrance gate to Mitchell Laithes. At the side of the gate ran a small stream which gurgled and bubbled as it passed under a small culvert into what was laughingly named the lagoon. This pictures up images in minds of palm trees and a clear pool of water, when in reality it is a sewerage treatment plant. As we peered through the gates, the whole site looked quite eerie, shrouded in mist with the old building standing in the distance, looking just as it had in its heyday, with the exception of some broken windows, of course, and graffiti. From what we could see, the building was surrounded by beautifully manicured gardens, which would obviously still be intended by a proud gardener. There were trees and shrubs all around, without a branch or twig out of place. The eerie thing was the silence, which to be honest was deafening, along with the mist which seemed to emanate from the ground. It rolled over the lawns and pathways like the scene from the very best of horror films. Very gothic, as though the set of a vampire story. We pushed open the old ornate cast iron gate which creaked into life with each push. Due to its great age and rust, it clung to its hinges. Then we entered the grounds, and as we walked up the driveway we noticed a small building to our left. This stood a good distance from the main body of the house. This building seemed to attract us all as though something was willing to enter, if we dare. Nervously we opened the door and a strange smell came from within, a smell that we had not come across before. We spoke about the smell and in the end put it down to the age of the building and the length of time it had stood empty. We then opened an inner door which led to a mortuary room, and standing right in the centre was the old mortuary slab, so cold looking, porcelain so white as our torchlight shone. It had obviously had many dead bodies upon it during the hospital's history. The drainage channels were very clear where all the blood of those who had passed would have been washed through. Even the block where the dead person's head would be rested during the final invasion of their privacy, the smell of death lingered. A cold shiver ran down our spines as we stood and looked and thought about what had happened in that room and what the room had witnessed over the years. As we left the post-mortem room, all of us had in our minds that we had just seen what is the future for everyone alive on the earth today, and that every one of us would end up on some mortuary slab at some point, as nobody gets out of this life alive. We agreed that we must come back and do an investigation there after dark. The closer we got to the building, the more the mist seemed to roll around the foundations, spreading out across the lawned areas as though stretching out to reach us. Surely this building could not be as unnerving as the mortuary had been, or could it? The mist stretched up the walls and entered into the building through the broken window panes. We arrived at the front door where someone had written, "All who enter here will die." Sadly, that was so true for many of the patients who had entered those premises never to see the light of day again. People who, due to their mental illness, were shut away from the larger society and for many years underwent some very dubious treatments and therapies, which, if you believe the stories, which were inflicted by some very sadistic doctors and nursing staff, some of the treatments were tantamount to torture from people who seemed to enjoy inflicting pain and suffering. These poor unfortunates were already tortured in mind, were now being tortured in body. There was constant experimentation with antipsychotic drugs, like a chemical kosh which dulled the brain, put people into heavy sedation. Many of these drugs were responsible for the deaths of some of the patients. Then there was the electroconvulsive therapy, where an electrical current was passed through the head of those suffering depression, inducing epileptic fits, often resulting in broken limbs due to the patient thrashing about, and for some even death. Then the treatment they all feared more than any other, the frontal lobotomy, where a spike was put through the frontal lobe of the brain, thus rendering it useless, which left the patient without emotion at all, sensing of nothingness, and again many suffered all manner of problems after this operation, and also many died. As we opened the door to the entrance lobby, we saw a desk and a couple of chairs which were upturned against a wall. There was an old Victorian-style fireplace with a portrait of Queen Victoria. This was askew on the wall, where wallpaper and plaster were peeling away. We decided to make this our hub, so that each investigator knew where to return, should we become split for any reason. As it was still light, we decided to do our baseline test through the building, looking for any natural phenomena which could cause someone to think that there was something paranormal. Loose floorboards that creak, broken windows where wind can come through, animal life within the buildings, which again could cause a variety of noises, and listening for any external noises which could be misconstrued as being paranormal. To our left was a doorway leading to Ward 1. We approached the door and nervously pushed it open. As we entered the room, several of the investigators said they could smell surgical spirit. We put this down to the fact we were in an old hospital, and therefore open to suggestion from our own minds. There were several beds and trolleys which had been thrown about, an old-style wheelchair in the corner. The interior of the ward was decaying and plaster falling from the walls, which exposed bare brickwork. We began our tests in this area and through the other wards, doctors' offices and nursing areas. We had all the usual equipment such as EMF meters, which are supposed to give out electromagnetic readings as to whether there is a spirit presence, as spirits use electricity to build up their energy, or indeed if there is something around which is giving high electrical output. Most meters have a scale of 1 to 10. The possibility of finding anything in this place with an electrical charge would be very slim, as the hospital had been closed for many years. We used digital thermometers which would show any increase or drops in the ambient temperature. As should a spirit be around, the temperature will drop significantly. As we walked around, we found several areas where noises were heard. We put it down to loose flooring, things moving in the breeze. All these things causing temperature drops throughout the building. We returned to the hub and chatted about what we had experienced and whether we thought that there was anything paranormal within the walls. The darkness came all too soon and the whole building took on a completely different persona, one of a scary old mental hospital, one of which had been subject of many horror movies. It was time to start the investigation in earnest, but this time the lights were out, and the only light we had was a torchlight and the light from our cameras. The time was 21:13 hours. We made the decision to go back down the driveway to the mortuary building, as though we wanted to get this part of the investigation out of the way as quickly as possible. We were all there waiting for something to happen, to see if something would return from behind the veil of death. We were desperate to find something paranormal, something to give us the knowledge that there are ghosts and that there is something beyond death. We started the cameras rolling and slowly walked to the door leading to the mortuary room, the room where so many post-mortems had taken place. It was pitch black in there. We started taking photographs, and as we did, the flash from the camera caught something on the mortuary slab. We quickly directed our torches at it, and there, sat on the end of the slab, resting on each side of the post-mortem headrest, were two teddy bears. None of us could remember seeing them when we had been in the room earlier. The teddy bears were very careworn and obviously of great age. We were all stunned and had no idea as to how this could have been. The cameraman informed us that he had just seen two light anomalies passing the screen, which at that point did not mean anything to us, as there is a big debate as to the true nature of orbs. We decided to do some EVP work, electronic voice phenomena, where a spirit is supposed to be able to communicate with us through the voice recording equipment. This is again a much debated subject in the paranormal world, as there is a school of thought who believe in something called the stone tape theory, where the fabric of the building is thought to contain memories and voices from the past. We played back the EVP recording and we had not picked up any voices, but we all could hear what sounded like children laughing. But it seemed to be in the distance. We could not quite work out what it was, so put it down to extraneous noise and left it at that. We walked away from the mortuary still scratching our heads about the appearance of the two teddy bears and the vague possibility that we could have missed them the first time we looked in there. We returned to the main building. Once inside, we entered through the double doors which led into Ward 1. There was an occasional flash of moonlight as it appeared from behind clouds, casting an eerie glow across the ward. As we were filming, the cameraman told us that several light anomalies had crossed the screen again. None of us in the group fully understand these anomalies, or orbs as they are known, as they can easily be caused by camera refraction, particles of dust, moisture, or even insects flying. On the other hand, there are a good few people who are convinced that orbs are actually sentient energy and can be called on command. Again, this area is very sketchy to say the least. We heard a tapping noise coming from the corner of the ward, so cautiously we walked towards the source of the noise and found it was the branch of a tree blowing against the window pane. We began to call out and ask if there were any spirit people or elemental spirits with us, and please could they make a noise or show us a sign by throwing something or touching one of us. We heard nothing, felt nothing, except for a drop in temperature, which we put down to it being nightfall. We walked out through the double doors at the end of the ward, which led into a stairwell. We ascended to Ward 2. We gently pushed the doors open, entered inside them. This was very similar to Ward 1 in appearance. There were a few more beds and a few old screens thrown about. By the nurse's station was a table with some chairs, so we made our way over to it and sat down. We again called out, asking to any spirit person there to come forward and speak with us. Sadly again we drew a blank, and our minds went back to the investigations we had been part of in the past as paying guests, when at this point in the evening there would have been at least a possession, stones thrown, a séance would be alive with spirit messages, and once again the realisation that these groups are really making a mockery of something so important. We attempted some EVP work. When we replayed it again there were no voices, but we could all hear the sound of very heavy breathing. This at one time being a tuberculosis hospital, who housed many people with this terrible lung issue, gave us some hope, and the sound that the heavy breathing whetted our appetites for more. We left Ward 2 and crossed the corridor which led to Ward 3. As we entered this ward there was a noticeable drop in temperature, so much so that we fastened our coats against the cold as we stood there. Our breath became visible, which was an indication as to how cold it really was. We took some photographs, and as we looked back we could see some very interesting shapes within the mist, and what looked like the faces of two children. But we put this down to the natural mist in the room and of course exhaled breath which the camera would pick up. We decided to do an Ouija session, so we all sat round the table, placed our fingers on the planchette and asked the spirit of the Ouija to come and help us to contact any spirits within the hospital. We asked the board how many spirits were in the building. The planchette moved and spelt out the word many. We were all a bit shocked and amazed that the board was actually working. We asked again how many spirits were in the room with us. The planchette moved and went to the number 2. So we knew that we had 2 spirits in the room with us. We asked again if the spirits were male. The planchette moved to no. So we knew the spirits were female. We asked the board the ages of the females. It moved to 10 and then to 11. So we had the spirits of 2 children who had passed away within the hospital walls. We asked the board if it could give us any names, and the planchette moved out and spelt Maggie, and moved again to spell Charlotte. We asked the board what year they had passed away. The planchette moved to 1825. We asked the cause of death. The planchette spelt out smallpox. We made our way back through Wards feeling quite disappointed that we had not witnessed anything with our own eyes. No stones had been thrown, none of us had been possessed, nothing on the EVP, no figures in the photographs, no full-bodied apparitions. But I have to say, as we made our way back through the wards, we all said that we felt as though we were being watched by an unseen eye and that we were being followed. We got back to the hub and sat with a coffee and chatted about the events of the night, our feelings on what had occurred. We discussed the Ouija session and we all agreed that not one of us had pushed the planchette. We checked through some footage that had been filmed and all we could really see were orbs floating around. But as we looked, we could see that there were two orbs which were much brighter than the rest. But we did not have an answer to what they were, and why they were brighter than any other, and we thought nothing more about it. The sun was due to rise, so we decided to pack all our stuff away. We left the old building, and on leaving we closed the door, and we looked back at the sign which stated, "All who enter here will die." We were all happy to be alive. The sun was just beginning to appear over the brow of the hill. We walked down the pathway past the beautifully manicured gardens, the lawns full of dew which glistened in the early morning light. Cobwebs hung from the shrubs as though encrusted with diamonds, and everywhere around us was a beautiful silence. As we walked further down past another lawn, we noticed that someone had walked across the grass, as the imprint of their feet was still there in the dew. As we looked more closely, we saw that it was two sets of footprints, and stranger still, they were the footprints of children. But how could this be? It was early morning, the sun was just rising in the sky. The hospital was miles away from any housing. We all just stood there and stared, and as we were looking, we heard what sounded like children laughing. We turned to look back up the drive leading to the hospital, and there at the very top stood two young girls, both dressed in long night dresses, each holding a teddy bear. The children waved at us before vanishing into the morning light. Finally, we had seen what we had been searching for. We vowed to return at a later date and see if we could catch sight of the spirit children again, or maybe even the many more spirits who are said to haunt Mitchell Laithes.